All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Gooey Lawrence here with Paul. So I'm going to be completely honest. So my camera was all in focus and it was perfect. And then I put on camo paint and now I don't think it can pick up my face.
Can't see
you.
there
we go. It just focused up. We're good now. I literally walked on and it would not focus and get it in. So I think it was having an issue recognizing my eyes or something like that. But we're glad to have you. Paul, glad to have you back.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Hey, good morning. So Paul and I are taking over the stream today to talk about our battle tactics part 2, be able to go on over and cover the different things that we missed. And then we also just didn't cover through most of it because we got sidetracked talking about a bunch of other stuff. So obviously Paul and I didn't coordinate well for our costumes this morning.
So yeah, I went officers club. He went enlisted.
Yeah, I went in the field, doing the thing.
Working.
Oh yeah, for sure. But aside from that, we do have just a couple of announcements. First of all, I'm supposed to let everybody know that merch is up. Woo. So if you do not know, there is a website called gooeycube.com/merch. Go on over and check it on out and buy some stuff and look completely awesome for your next con. Paul, do you have any announcements to go on over and get out for everybody?
I'm probably going to buy a t-shirt, but beyond that, no.
Nice. Just any t-shirt, just going to Walmart and just picking up.
gooeycube.com/merch. And then there's the logo t-shirt is $25 plus whatever shipping is.
Oh, there you go.
Might get a beanie as well. We'll see.
Awesome. As well as we're going to have a couple of different hashtag contests going on out throughout the stream. So when I tell you to, you're going to want to type hashtag LLL and hashtag maps into the chat. It's going to go through and it'll register you for the different giveaways that are going on and those giveaways are going to be completed at a time that Camera Mandy knows and I don't, because I'm just here as a volunteer to help on out. So Paul, you have anything else going on that you want to make sure everybody knows?
Not in particular. Maybe Sunday.
Nice. anything going on in your life that you just want to share with the world or anything, or just
let's see. I have started up woodworking, so I'm doing a lot of pen turning. I know Alphinius got one of my works. Other than that, just terrain listings with Dwarven Force terrain.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much all I'm up to.
Nice. Sounds good. Apparently, Camera Mandy doesn't know when the giveaways are going to be either. So just, make sure you get in as many votes as possible. And we'll be good. With that, this is actually the fastest that we've ever gotten through announcements and stuff. So we might actually be able to get through our entire content for the entire stream today, Paul. Which
I feel like one of us should at least have an Alphinius impersonation. Ha, good morning.
Oh, that's definitely you. That's 100% you.
Well, let me hear yours. I have to hear yours.
Oh, what's mine?
Yeah.
Right, hold on. Let me get into the character here. Good morning, everybody. Alphinius Goo here.
Perfect. Love it.
It definitely.
We don't need him. We got it.
Oh yeah, there we go. It definitely helps that I was, known him since the day I came out of my mom. So yeah,
there's
that long. It's a lot of Alphinius to put up with. Need to throw in an accent. I guess that's Camera Mandy's. I don't know. Camera Mandy's in the chat here.
What a critic.
I appreciate it. Geeky Hoodie's got my back.
I think so.
So with that, so Paul and I had this idea that we wanted to go through, and basically one of the most frustrating aspects, I think, of Dungeons and Dragons that I think happens universally across every group at some point is your group gets completely bogged down in the planning process. You've got some information, you've got a quest, and then everybody has different intentions on what they kind of want to get out or how they want to approach it. And all of a sudden, the dungeon master who planned for maybe you to go through and get through, 8 rooms in a dungeon, you guys spend 4 hours talking about how to get through the first door. He's upset or she's upset. They are upset. That's a better one to use. They are upset. Your group is upset. And it really just slogs down the entire campaign. So Paul and I want to go through and address having military experience. Paul, you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Okay. So I commissioned out of Texas A&M University, ROTC, branched quartermaster. I did a couple of years in White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. I then commanded over in Korea. I spent 3 years over there. And then came over here to Fort Hood, Texas, or Fort Cavazos, as it is now, and medically retired after that. So nice. Most of my experience has been on the logistics side. I ran combat logistics patrols in Afghanistan. Took a rocket over there. So I've seen combat. It's
I wasn't saying you didn't. Aside from the fact that obviously you didn't dress for the part.
I mean, I'm not a badass snake eater like some people, but I got my timing.
Hey, just remember, everybody, bullets don't fly without supply.
I like it.
My background is in 2010. I went ahead and enlisted in the National Guard as a combat medic, and about halfway through basic training, I absolutely just fell in love with Army culture. And after a year with my National Guard unit, I got what's called a conditional release and went active duty, from which I got to go over and try out for the what's called the 18 X-ray program, or the Special Forces program. Made it through Q course. If you've ever seen that really old documentary, 2 Weeks in Hell, awesome. Way to just completely kill the vibe, Paul.
No, sorry. This glare is bothering me. Go on.
When you covered it up, it totally changed your white balance. That was really funny. But went through, did that whole 2 weeks in hell. Although when I went through it was 3 weeks in hell, no big deal. Got picked up, went through the entire Special Forces Q course. It was about 2 years long. Got specialized in communications. Hey, appreciate you there, Belinda Bennett. It's a solid name. Woo! 4 months in a row. I wonder who our longest sub is. I have no idea. I don't pay attention enough. But Belinda Bennett, you're now the longest subscriber. So there you go. Got picked up from that. I've done 2 deployments to Ukraine, 2 to Afghanistan, and my last one was to Poland. And now I'm in the process of going ahead and moving on out of the Army. And during that entire time, was big into Dungeons and Dragons. Definitely played on the down low. What's up, Paul? You got to look.
2 deployments to Ukraine.
Yep.
Tell me about that. That's whoa.
So I went in 2015, right after the Russians took Crimea, and then I went back again in 2017. So at that point, it was just training. It wasn't like combat zone stuff like it is now. And then, I did have a lot of fun.
Special Forces, y'all are primarily trainers for local military. Is that an accurate reflection of the Green Beret mission?
That is one of the aspects. So we specialize in something called unconventional warfare, and an aspect of unconventional warfare is going on over and training up troops to go on over and essentially fight their own battles. There's a bunch of different discussions about what that actually looks like, whether or not that's foreign internal defense, whether or not it's UW. It is so much fun because so many things I learned in the Special Forces applies to Dungeons and Dragons. As most of the military, your entire career, you don't spend doing combat deployments. You go to this place called Fort Irwin, California, where you just LARP. All you do is you just live action role play Army. There's another place over in Louisiana called Fort Polk. And it's the same thing. It's all just LARPing. It's all just Dungeons and Dragons. It's just where all the nerds go that weren't into fantasy football. I had a lot of fun. For me, like most of my military career, I thought I was like the only nerd in the Army too. I don't know if that was like your background. It's definitely getting like more like open now, where I've seen different like S2s and stuff like that being like, hey, it's D&D night on Tuesday, and then skiff or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Like everybody in my company, like I was sort of like a center of gravity, bringing people in for play. But like troops in my platoon, like our S1, S2, like everybody just kind of came together. And we had downrange in Afghanistan. Like I cleared out one of our motor bays, and it was almost nightly. When we weren't on mission, we were there, playing D&D like pretty much every night. It was and we I found one of those charity programs where like troops can send an email about like, hey, we want more, we want beef jerky, I want muscle magazines or what have you. So I said, hey, I want D&D material. Send whatever you got. I'm a portion it out to my players. And there ended up being I think she was a English teacher from like Wisconsin, who sent like a whole crate like full of books and dice and notebooks and like just everything you can imagine. And I made sure everybody got a set of dice. Everybody got like it was like Dungeon Master's manuals and players handbooks, and so yeah, it was a really good experience.
So I have 2 funny stories before we get back on topic and actually have a productive conversation. So first one is, I think one of my funniest experiences was flying to my first trip to Afghanistan, and I brought D&D stuff because I'd finally found another GB Green Beret who played D&D. So we're like, oh, we're gonna play like in our off time and whatnot. And it's really funny because I had an entire thing of dice. It's for us to have physical dice. Well, when you fly through Qatar, it's really funny because they very specifically say
gambling, right?
Yeah, they say
Oof.
no dice. And so because gambling is illegal in Qatar and stuff. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't apply to me. And luckily I didn't get caught, which is really funny.
Well, I mean, when we went over there, basically U.S. Customs came and trained up one of our troops. So we inspected ourselves to make sure that we were in compliance with all of our with all of our customs related issues. So especially on the way back, we loaded up on some, like I got this big patchwork rug of furs. Now I can't tell you that every single portion of that fur is necessarily within compliance of but no, it was pretty much on the honor system, which is a terrible idea, really. Terrible.
Well, I mean, that's fun military stories. And then my second funny story. What's up?
Go ahead.
My second thing is actually this last trip to Poland. I ran into, or no, it wasn't Poland. No, this is my second trip to Afghanistan. My second trip to Afghanistan was funny because we had Polish infantry were the ones who were guarding the outside of our base. And I just happened to find out that one of the Pole guys was actually super into Dungeons and Dragons. So I actually contacted Alphinius and got module 1 and gave that to him. Because they the European distribution channels for different RPG content is way different than we just produce all kinds of stuff over there. So when I told him oh yeah, this is what my I have a friend who has this company and this is what they go through do. He's like, there's nothing like that in Poland. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me get you. So I marked that as the first international, Gooey Cube expansion into Poland. So
nice.
But with that, hey, what's up there, CID? I mean, I think he has the protection of the DD-214, which just probably helps out a little bit.
Statute of limitations. This was 2010.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm good, probably.
And I just make sure I don't do anything worse than what the CID guys are doing. So, but as we circle back, essentially one of the things that I think Paul and I have both encountered as we've had our different campaigns, I'm sure. Now, are you a DM or just a player, Paul?
I'm mostly DM. Every so often I'll indulge myself, or one of my kids will run a one shot. And then I have a lot of fun with that. But yeah, nice. I volunteer at my local library every other week. I put on a session for local kids. And then my family, we have a recurring game that I actually film a lot of those episodes and throw them up on YouTube. So, yeah.
Well, you got a link for us or something, bro?
I can find that.
Good. Well, I'm monologuing. You can go and find the link, post up in the chat for us, so that people can check out your stuff. One of the things that Paul and I think have both been able to bring to our different tables is just that aspect of military planning and just being able to be hey, because every single organization, anytime you get two people together and they are trying to come together and trying to come up with what to do, you run into issues with planning. It's a universal problem. It's in the military. It's in Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't matter where you're at. So obviously there's different organizations that have gone through and come up with different systems in order to be able to try and help solve that problem. So we've really enjoyed being able to apply some of that kind of military planning skills to Dungeons and Dragons. And that's what we want to go over and share with you today. Now, a couple of our different disclaimers that we have is, first of all this stuff is open source. It's very much up on Google. We train it to foreign partners. None of this is classified in any aspect of it whatsoever. And then the second thing is that by the way, this is the link. It's up in the chat. If you guys want to go and just type in that super long, URL back there, or just copy and paste it up from the chat. But that's where you can find Paul's, I'm sure, hilarious Dungeon Dragon sessions.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 sons and a daughter and my wife, and we all play together, and they can be a real riot. So, I mean, it's not professionally edited. I film it on my iPhone, and then I used to use Microsoft Video Editor to mash them together, and I just upload them and send them.
Perfect.
So, but yeah, there's probably 60 hours of content on there.
Solid. So there you go. If you guys are missing out, go ahead and check that on out.
We're on episode 18 has been shot. I'm in the process of they discontinued Microsoft Video Editor, so now I'm trying to do stuff I bought a Mac. So now I'm going to try and figure that out, and we'll see if we can get things uploaded cleanly once more.
Nah, I definitely hear you. Our second disclaimer is just so you guys all know, Dungeons and Dragons is a game. It is not based out of realism or simulation. And therefore, if you ever get, an army guy like me coming to your table and be like, well, this is what it'd be like in real life, you can be like, right. But inside of this world, there's like magic and dragons and stuff. So that plan doesn't work because I'm the DM and that's how it works. But that's just one of the things that you definitely want to make sure that whenever you apply some of that, kind of real life experience, if it's enhancing the game, awesome. If it's taking away from it, that's where you go through and be like, hey, that's cool, but we're going to suspend our disbelief and go this direction. And I know you have something to say because I saw the perk up of, oh, I have a point.
No, not really. No, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
I'm good.
You seem so excited. I was like, oh, all right.
No, okay. What it really was I was sitting here and you see this light right here.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I got to cover that up with my head. The lighting is killing me today. Sure. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're all good. So with that, we want to go through and basically just share with you guys what we kind of feel are some of the ways that you can apply these military steps of planning to your Dungeons and Dragons group. So that way, hopefully you guys can have a more productive conversation in your planning, be able to maybe cover down on some contingencies that you may have not thought of, make sure that everybody's on the same page, and then be able to go on over and have a great session. That's definitely Paul and I, last time that we talked, definitely we're kind of in the weird scope of players where if combat is boring, we're having fun. Because then that means that we did a good job. We got all the information that we were supposed to have. We planned accordingly. We covered our contingencies. And now we're being able to execute our plan really well because we're not having a ton of casualties and we're not by the skin of our teeth and such.
So one of the things I absolutely love doing is I called it taking 20 on combat. So back in third edition, we had a concept called taking 20, where if you have unlimited time and no consequence for failure, you can literally try over and over and over again until you get natural 20 success. And I used to love to do that during combat. So for example, if we were fighting like a T-Rex, I'd be like, well, I'm flying on a dire bat and I have 500 arrows in my quiver of Alona. I'm just going to fly, like the rest of the party can hide. I'm going to fly around the T-Rex and shoot it with arrows until it dies. Like, well, it can run. I'm like, okay, well, what's this movement speed? Well, this and this. Well, I move faster than that. So it can't outrun me. It can't hide from me. We're on flat open terrain. It just dies. No need to roll dice. Let's move on. And DMs used to hate that. But when you understand your capabilities and can exploit the limitations of your enemy, why not?
That's one of the things that is definitely true. I think I've found that when I've played with different players who definitely think tactically, who go through and actually come up with a plan and stuff like that. You almost need a mechanic like that to just be like, all right, there's no way that you guys aren't going to win this, but it's going to take so long to play out with D&D mechanics that we're just going to go ahead and fast forward and just kind of come out. And it's a thing. I mean, that's one of the things that definitely just understanding that like the mechanics of D&D are not to be a simulation. They are to be fun in the way that the majority of the population plays. That's where, I mean, my greatest like example of this is essentially when you look at any kind of archetype with like a bow in D&D, is there's no real good comparisons to history where that's used effectively. The most effective archers that you really look at are the English longbowmen, and their tactic is they stand super effing far away, and slowly shoot from that. But that's not fun to play. What's fun to play is Legolas when you're hopping on a shield and you're skateboarding downstairs while you're rapid firing, taking out orcs. Like that's what everybody wants to play. And that's what the mechanics are more geared to versus realism. And so that's definitely what I think that's probably an argument that is a little bit unique to like military D&D tables, is when they're like, well, the realistically or this or that. I've heard different things about this as far as the Mongolian horse archers. Sometimes I get into, I think the Egyptian chariot archers were kind of a similar argument and stuff like that. But I mean, even if you look at any horse archery like videos and stuff like that,
that's a good point.
It's true. But if you really look at that, like, and again, this is just where you get what is the best, as far as what's your argument for your criteria for that. If you look at any like horse archers that like do that kind of stuff, you have to get so close up on everybody. It's not what everybody kind of thinks it is. It is very much a like, you're riding by, you get your shot off, you hit or miss, and then you like ride around way
Yeah.
outside of their range and come on back.
And that just kind of shows you the power of maneuver. I mean, you know, shoot, move, and communicate. You know, the holy trinity.
Medicate is it's now shoot, move, communicate, medicate.
Sure.
That's the newest officer bullet for their OCR or OER. But yeah, so just so you guys understand just some of that aspects, that's the problem with the chat having up is that you're sitting there, you're on a roll, and then you see something, and you're like, oh, let me go ahead and just interrupt my train of thought.
Yeah.
But that's just one of the things. Just understand that when it comes to realism and stuff, you know, don't get bogged down in it, and that's where definitely respecting your DM. But to the planning aspect of it, let's go ahead and go over what Paul and I kind of agree are probably the most applicable military planning steps to an actual D&D adventuring party. We talked about the military decision-making process last episode. That's like super high up, what we call Starfleet Command. As far as planning and stuff like that, what we're going to talk about today is going to be the troop leading procedures, which is generally used for a platoon size or smaller.
And if I can preface all this, so a lot of people are going to be, they're going to feel like they're wasting their time with a long, deliberate planning process. And yet things can grind down to a halt if you're not efficient, if you're not effective about it. Like if people are dithering and going back and forth and then the egos come out, yeah, this can take forever and is a huge waste of time and will make everyone sad. But if you are efficient, if you are goal-oriented, if you work well as a team, like you can knock out an abbreviated form of this rather quickly and have a satisfactory ending. And that takes practice, and that takes learning how to work with your teammates.
That's one of the things that like you really can't talk enough about how much interpersonal communication really comes into Dungeons and Dragons and playing it. And it comes into the planning process, even if you're on the military, understanding when somebody's being a real stick in the mud about a specific aspect of a plan or something like that. You really don't have to say not so much what are they saying. You really have to be like, hey, what do they really mean? What is their real thing here? Because sometimes, I mean, somebody's sticking point in a plan might just be, hey, maybe I have this ability that I really want to use, and I would like to make sure the plan involves me being able to use that ability. And when you understand that, then you're able to go through and be like, oh yeah, we can go ahead and we can plan for that. With that, the troop leading procedures, there are 8 steps to it, and those are receive the mission, issue a warning order, make a tentative plan, initiate movement, conduct reconnaissance, complete the plan, issue the operation order, and then supervise and refine, which is Paul's specialty. Do you have any notes before we go over and get into what step 1 kind of looks like and how it might apply to Dungeons and Dragons?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So this is the War College of Zyathé. Welcome, everybody. You guys are all now graduates. We kind of do that like that online college kind of thing where it's just did you pay tuition? Yeah, you're good. With receiving the mission, what are some of the aspects that you receive the mission part is really, you can replace it and say receive the quest. And this, I think, is the second most planned for part that a dungeon master does, in my opinion. Aside from some of the, kind of mechanics of a quest, this is where your dungeon master is coming up with all the different, little secrets that they want to give, your role play interactions, what different, Easter eggs they want to lay down in order to lead your party to what they want you to go, what the DM wants you to go do inside the mission. And so this is actually a step that I think A, people have a lot of fun with, and then B, is the most like meat that you can kind of get off the bone. Paul, what are some of your thoughts?
So, I mean, we used to call this the plot hook. And when I used to play Living Greyhawk and RPGA play, you had these 4-hour gaming modules where you would show up at a table at a convention and then, boom, you were off to the races. And if you didn't finish in your allotted time, you missed out. So a lot of times people just kind of hand wave away. Quest giver shows up, tells us what we need to do, so we do it, period. Now, if you're playing in a home campaign, the DM can be a bit more creative about that. You can be a bit more selective in, well, just because the quest giver tells you the quest doesn't necessarily mean you need to like follow like little ducks in a row. And sometimes insidious DMs will use that to trick the players into either placing themselves in peril or assisting the villains with a villainous plan. unbeknownst to them. And as a DM, I love doing stuff like that. I like when players just take things for granted and kind of get into the metagame mindset. That's where you need to kind of put it on its head and make players analyze, like, why do we listen to every black hooded figure in the corner of a tavern when he tells us he has a quest? Why do we do that? Yeah, I mean, because if the alternative is just staying home and being bored, or trying to make your own sort of trouble, and that comes to a question between how much does your DM prepare ahead of time and railroad you versus how much open world agency you really have.
And that's why I definitely think one of the things to just understand is just determining intent of your quest giver is a really important tool that players should definitely bring to the table. Hey, why is this person the one giving me this quest? What are they getting out of it? What am I signing on for when I go through and accept this? And when you start asking those questions, depending on your DM, they may have not thought of that, which may mean that now they have some really good, like, oh, my players are looking for this. Let me go ahead and make this so that way I can go through and feed it to them and be able to help them get a much more deeper campaign. And then too, when you understand that, then you can also understand how your objectives might change. If your intent is to, overthrow the evil king, whatever your, insert general plot line here, when you understand that that's just the intent, overthrowing it might not mean I have to kill the king. There might be a lot of different ways to be able to go through and accomplish that. And definitely when you can go through and determine the intent of your quest giver and then identify what the key tasks are to achieve that intent are two huge aspects of being able to really understand how to go through and complete your quest.
And that's the difference between the main quest and the side quest. Like if you just happen to be traveling through the area and I hear a holler for help out in the woods. I mean, you're really kind of reactive in that case. But when it comes to like the main storyline, generally, once you break contact with the big bad evil guy or whatever the initial introduction to the main stakes are, you have a bit more time to plan, prepare, and orient yourself instead of just being purely reactive.
And one of the beauties of this is so I'm actually a big fan of split the party in specific situations. Am I going to split the party? Am I going to split the party in a dungeon? Probably not. If I'm in a safe town that's well guarded and we're not hunted and stuff like that, I might be like, hey, why don't you two go on over and talk to your guys's role play connection, over there. So that way, again, for me, it's a little bit of realism too. If we're going to go talk to somebody, do I want 6 people in there, all trying to ask the same? It's like, no, I'll send you 2 off over here. And then the rest of your group can go on over and out of character plan while the DM's playing with those guys and be able to think through and be able to accomplish some of this stuff on the back end. Just allowing you to be able to simultaneously get multiple things done. Again, that's the way that I like to play.
If you're being purposeful about it and not irresponsible, like we're gathering information so we can make good decisions, so we can do our quest, and I'm utilizing my class features. I'm like, as a DM, I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. But oftentimes, if the party recklessly or foolishly or impulsively splits the party, well, that's where you got to punish. So
and that's what I mean, and that's when split the party turns into, hey, me and the rogue are going to go try and sneak into the evil governor's mansion that's guarded with 50 demons and all this kind of other stuff, but we have a decent stealth roll, so we think we're going to be just fine. That's where it's like, all right, well, you can choose your actions, you can't choose your consequences. But that's where for me, I think that's when the DM can like come back to, is the party making good choices? Yes. Yeah. Cool. I'm not going to go through and mess with them. They're making reckless or poor choices. That's when I think there's definitely some issues. Do you have anything else you want to cover in step 1 as far as tips that, parties can go through as far as gathering this information, or as far as addressing, receiving your quest or receiving your mission?
So a lot of I guess civilian interpretation of that could kind of feel like this is really rigid. And you're like, okay, well, am I in step 1 or am I in step 2? I mean, there's an abbreviated form of this where you're not necessarily like going lockstep number by number. There can be a little bleed over. You can. It's
very fluid too.
Yeah, exactly. So think of these as more guidelines than actual rules.
Always.
Well,
if you do them wrong.
These help direct your planning process, but don't let them inhibit or I guess, retard your planning process, if that makes sense.
And that's definitely, for me, the only time that I like will pump the brakes on a group if I'm like playing and stuff like that is when I'm doing like a self-analyzation when the group is moving and I'm like, hey, I don't understand everything that we're doing and while we're doing it right now.
What are we
That's
doing?
the only that's the only time where I'll be like, hey guys, like let's hold on. What is driving us to go do this real quick? Let me get on the same page as you. And that's where I might kind of be like, hey, like maybe like let's go back a step just to make sure that I like we're on the same page. With that, you get on to your step 2, which is issuing a warning order. Now, a warning order, do you have like what's your civilian definition of a warning order there, Paul?
Oh, geez. Let me think about that. So basically, with the purpose of a warning order is, hey, heads up. This is what you're going to do. We haven't fully thought this out yet. We don't know exactly what we're doing, but there's some things that you need to start doing right now. So that way, once we do come up with a full plan, you are prepped, prepared, standing on the line, ready to go. So a lot of warning order would be like, hey, we heard word there's vampires active in the area. Well, we don't know the details of it yet. We're not ready to storm the Count's castle yet, but maybe we need to go get some wooden stakes. Maybe we need to go find some silver. Maybe we need to go procure some holy water. Maybe we need to go contact the local cleric. It's basically starting the engine rolling before you commit.
I definitely think an example of this, the most basic example of this to me is like, let's say that we're going over, let's say our parties may be split, or let's say there's different role play interactions that are going on, maybe in a tavern, and somebody gets essentially information of like an imminent threat or like something that's going to happen. So for instance, like there is a vampire in the town, maybe there's a shapeshifter in the town or something like that. Maybe, hey, we know an orc tribe is, getting ready to come over and raid this village. That to me is like, it's one of those things that when you get that piece of information, you almost like stop role playing or stop the interaction you're having. It's like, hey, I need to let everybody know what's going on right now, because, again, if you let a shapeshifter run around without the entire group knowing like, hey, there might be a shapeshifter, that gives the shapeshifter a lot of opportunity to be able to go through and really screw with your party. And so that for me is like some of the examples of like, hey, I need to shift everybody's thinking right now to what the imminent threat essentially is going to be happening.
And I think one of the most important steps of this is that basic timeline. Like, how much time do we have to prepare for this? How much time can we study? How much time can we investigate? How much time do we need to travel? Can we take a long rest? Can we take a short rest? Like you are able to marshal resources with time, and establishing what that time looks like is important to know before you commit yourself into something that may not be supportable based on what the information that you have.
I definitely think whoever's gathering information, whoever's getting this, at a bare minimum, you need the 5 W's. You need to know who, what, when, where, and why. And that way, because this is one of the things that I definitely learned from it would have been both trips to Afghanistan. I had a period of time where I was working in what's called the JOC, the Joint Operations Center. From there, we were doing mission command. We were monitoring all the different guys who were going out on missions and things that were going on. And our commanders at some point had to sleep. It's a crutch. Like, you should definitely do it as little as possible. But our commanders at some time had to sleep, but there's also decisions that definitely remained solely in their purview. And so we had what we called wake up criteria, which was, hey, something important. This list of things are important enough to wake me up. And one of the things, if you wanted to get chewed out, like you have never been chewed out before, is wake up a commander who's already been awake for 20 something hours. He's trying to get his 3 hours of sleep before he has to go over and go into a million briefings the next day and say, hey, this happened. And then they ask you some basic questions about the context of it, and you have no answer for it. And so definitely being able to, whenever you get something like, hey, the orcs are getting ready to attack, definitely trying to be like, all right, let me try and think, who? Okay, how many orcs are we looking at? Do we have a familiar picture of what these orcs are? Do we think that they're coming to bear with a larger force or whatever? So we know that they're going to attack. What are they attacking with? Are they attacking with just melee weapons? Do you think they're bringing siege equipment? Do we think they're bringing hybrid animals? Do we think they're bringing magics?
Casters.
What'd you say?
I said casters.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And honestly, casters are a great analog to a lot of modern day technology. I mean, you have your artillery, your area effect weaponry, reconnaissance, and, mind control magic. I mean, there's no direct analog to that, but especially when it comes to more the civil affairs.
What do you mean?
Yeah, psyops. Yeah, it's not exactly mind control magic, but that's probably the closest thing we have today.
Advertising, subliminal messaging.
Or cyber. I think cyber warfare is probably about the closest you get to mind control magic.
Probably.
Very close.
So definitely what your when, definitely understanding like, hey, how fast are we moving here? How long do we have? How long is it going to take us to be able to get our forces ready?
Like, can I get the townsfolk to start digging trenches? Can they set up barricades? Can they get barrels of oil? Like, what are my resources? What do I have?
The further down I get into like medieval history and stuff like that, I realized the most devastating weapon that any force had was a ditch. Like, I'm just realizing like how like ditches were used everywhere. They're used around castles. They were used on battlefields. They were like ditches were everywhere. Like, definitely, hey, do you want to go through and help improve our situation here? Start digging a ditch.
Start digging. I mean, even in Ukraine today, I mean, you're seeing almost a return to siege warfare, or trench warfare.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, a ditch.
Yep.
Who knew?
Getting into your where again, which direction are they coming from? What is what we call the most likely avenue of approach? Where's the fastest that they can come? Where are you most vulnerable out inside of your locations?
Oh, okay. Tag me in.
Go for it.
One of my absolute favorite aspects of any playing process was always enemy's most likely course of action and enemy's most dangerous course of action. Because here I could, as a dungeon master, put on my hat, working for the U.S. federal government, and be like, okay, I am an insurgent. Here's what I'm likely to do. I've been attacked recently. My supplies have been pretty low. I got my AKs, I got my RPGs, I got my my Toyota or my Toyota Helixes.
Helix? You mean a Hilux?
That's the one.
You pogue.
I'm coming. I'm coming from the town. I've watched you, so I know when your convoys generally head out. I've got you. I have eyes on your perimeter. I know what your guard schedules look like. So that's my most likely course of action. So it was about imagining what the enemy was most likely to do and committing that to an assumption that we have. Now, the most dangerous course of action was like, okay, let's say I've got my hands on some high speed, bomb making materials, and now I can execute a complex ambush. And now I've mapped out your response time on your medevacs. So now I'm just waiting for that helicopter to come in because that's my real target. So I want to hit you. I want to ping you. I want to lock you down. I want to make some casualties, and I'm going to wait for that sweet, sweet bird to show up. And then we're going to get on the news because that's what we want. And that would figure more into the most dangerous course of action. And so by analyzing what we've seen before and what makes sense, and then imagining, well, let's say that they're really putting their best foot forward on this and they're trying to be as nasty as possible. Like, can I imagine their actions, predict what they're going to do, and take steps to make that fail, to mitigate them? I loved it.
And in D&D, one of the hardest things I think for players is that a lot of times doing that kind of wargaming, doing that, trying to figure out the most likely and most dangerous, feels a lot like metagaming. And so there's definitely two ways to kind of, I feel like, approach this is, first of all, cue the DM's NPCs to assist you with this process. And basically, as you're asking yourself these things, be asking targeted questions to NPCs, finding whoever the watch guard is, finding whoever you think is like the most veteran player, and then starting to ask them some of these, hey, which direction do you think they'd be most likely to come from? And get that information. It just kind of covers you. So that way it doesn't feel like you're metagaming as much. The DM's not going to necessarily call you on out.
I really like that. It's kind of using the DM against themselves.
Exactly.
So for example, I was running a game, and like I have a PC with, like, I'm the DM, and I also have a DM's PC with the players. And we were doing this murder mystery. And they turn to me and they say, well, who do you think did it? And I'm like, oh, God. Well, I mean, I can't, like, I know who did it, but I can't just give you the answer. But any answer I do give you, then you're just going to assume rules out a possible likely suspect. So it's like, well, I had to give them sort of a bad idea that was somewhat plausible for me to have, But that is fascinating, using the DM's own involvement and strength against the DM.
And I look at this honestly like genie wishes. where I think the more broad the question the players ask me, the worse information they are going to get. If I have players coming on over and they're trying to find out, about which what this orc attack is going to look like, so that way they can plan for it. If they tell me what are the orcs going to do, I'm going to give them really crappy information. If they're asking me much more targeted, pointed questions about, what things have they done in the past? What maybe, did they attack like another village? Are there any survivors from that village over here? Can we talk to them and try and actually get like some more firsthand accounts? When you ask more targeted questions like that, I think the DM's more willing to give you credible information versus when you just want everything handed to you. That's when the DM's going to kind of pull a genie on you and kind of give you some crappy stuff. With that, we get on to step 3, which is make a tentative plan. This, I would argue, is probably the most that any group really gets to. So they're kind of like, it's been 3 hours. We've been planning on this. We all want to go fight some stuff. Let's just move out with whatever we have.
Well, this is where you can get a difference of opinion. Yeah. So, for example, the rogue wants to be sneaky. The fighter the barbarian wants to kick down the door. The wizard wants to have an overly convoluted, arcane enhanced debacle. I mean, so that's where we get this all out on the table to see where people's thoughts are at.
And what would we call that? We'd call that mission analysis. And mission analysis is when you're really going over and you're getting deep dive into what do we need to accomplish? What's the terrain looking like? What's the different factors that go into? And then you're able to get into your analysis of options or your course of action analysis. This is something that, depending on like your unit, could be like days. We've definitely had different like training exercises where it's like, hey, here's your mission. And we totally just press the mute button. And we'd have like 2 or 3 days to go through and plan out and research everything. And this is where we're getting into like the nitpicky, like, hey, how far can our vehicles make it on this much fuel? If we need to get a refuel point in, what different, and that's where, how much food do we need to bring? How much water do we need to bring? That's where you get really deep into that COA. I've also had COA analysis that also went like an hour, and it was like, all right, hey, put it together and then see what you get. But this is definitely where, if you want to do, your stealth plan, your magic plan, your kick down the door plan, that's where you can kind of be like, hey, if you all understand the mission first and the different parameters and factors, then you can go through and say, hey, come up with a plan for kicking down the door and doing this very direct, come up with a plan for doing this role playing, and then let's compare those and pick out the good parts from each and create our next hybrid plan.
Quick departure, and now I want to make more of an effort to engage the people in chat. If you have questions for us, if you could like slam them down in all the caps locks, because I want to pay attention to what we're saying and then also answer all questions. So whatever you can do to highlight your message, if you want a response to a question, that would be really helpful for us. I see Nevitz the Halfling asked, do you all find that you need someone to shepherd this process, like a player captain?
Ooh, we have different opinions about this.
We do. So I respect that most people I play D&D with are very freewheeling, very fiercely independent. You could describe them as, and won't necessarily appreciate if they feel like they are subordinate to anyone else. So you have to almost lead by example, and if you can demonstrate that you're not looking to take charge, that you're not in it for your ego, if you're not bossing people around, that you want other people to shine and be successful, and that you're more of a supporter than the protagonist, the hero that everybody else is a sidekick to, then you can informally influence other people. But you have to respect their autonomy and their agency. Otherwise, they're going to get defensive, and then they're going to be combative, and then your job just got 1,000 times harder.
So my opinion on this, as far as when it comes to like group leaders or how it goes, I believe that every group has a leader. Now, if the group, there's a difference between whether or not the group knows that or not. But I do feel like every DM has like a preference that, everybody has an equal vote, but there's definitely one person in that group that gets an additional vote, that if there's a tiebreaker, they're going to go ahead and go on that side of the thing. I think that's just mostly human nature. I don't think it's necessarily something that is, nefarious in any way or whatnot. I think the best ways to address that, or at least the way that I address this, is if we are playing in somebody's story arc, if this content is definitely revolving around a person and their background, and we're kind of playing in there, I generally default to that person as the leader. That's what I do as a player. That's not something that I dictate as a DM. Because again, for me, I see it as this is their time to shine. And I trust that when it's my time and when it's my story arc, that the ball will be kicked into my court and I will get that same courtesy. I also believe that there's different situations in which different players kind of take lead. There are definitely, like Alphinius, for instance, if there's a role-playing situation, he definitely is one of those guys who wants to be front center. That guy loves role-playing. He's great at it. It's a lot of fun being with him. And that's something where, like, if it's a role-playing situation, I am very happy to go on over and kind of take the back role, because when there's a role-playing situation where I'm the lead, I want to do that. I definitely think that the best way it works out is kind of like what Paul was saying, is that when you offer that courtesy to other people, it's offered in return. And that's the best way to kind of do that kind of servant leader kind of aspect. I think once that trust is built across the table, then you get a well-functioning kind of leadership structure that does bounce from person to person, because everybody trusts that at some point it's going to be given to them.
Excellent. But
yeah, I do think it is one of those things that during your session 0, you need to make it very clear, especially to veteran players, that it is every player's responsibility to involve other players in playing. It should not be this kind of weird like dynamic where everybody's only playing with the DM individually. It should be like, hey, I'm gonna go talk to this person. I want to grab this other person to come talk with me to them. And that way you're involving more people in play. Same thing, like just like this conversation that Paul and I are having. It's very much like, hey, I get my little thing, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to pitch it over to Paul and be like, hey, Paul, what questions do you maybe have for this NPC? Hey, was there anything that I missed over there? You know, Hogarth, do you think we should go on over, you know, and just being able to, it is your responsibility to involve other players. And I think that's one of the best ways to go on over and help facilitate the process. With that, for the bottom lines that you should make sure that you look like, again, player input, make sure that you go through, and this is where honestly having like a whiteboard can be very, very helpful, because as people bring up different parts of the plan or different important things, being able to write them so that way they're up on the board, it helps people feel validated, you know, especially if you have like a quiet player that, you know, maybe kind of feels like they get left out, you know, and then you have some other loud player that's like, but they never talk up. And it's like, right, well, because you were talking the entire time. Having a whiteboard and being able to be like, hey, what does everybody think is important? And just write it down. And it doesn't matter if it's real or not. Like first time around, write everything down on the board. So that way everybody is like heard and validated that. And then from there, you can go as a group and be like, hey, you know, this piece of information, we only got it from one person. It's probably not reliable. Maybe let's go through it, you know, and you're able to actually go through and focus that out. But definitely in that player input, writing stuff down and being able to work that. And then also grabbing your note taker. This is honestly probably where note takers shine. That's the majority of the information that nobody is. What you got, Paul?
If you love your DM, take notes. It will make them feel that you care about their game, that you care about their story, and that you're really involved in giving effort. There's nothing, I think, more demoralizing as a DM if I see somebody, you know, distracted on their phone, paying half attention, and just think, hey guys, you know, when's it my turn in initiative? And then when it's their turn, they're like, okay, well, let me think about what I need to do, while everybody just sits there hating life. So, yeah, don't be that guy.
No, absolutely. But at the same time, too, like when you're in this planning process, this is where your note taker gets to be like, hey, like, what was that guy's name? And the note taker gets to be like, I wrote that down because I'm a good person.
Love note takers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Your coordination within your party and your allies. This is one thing that when you're looking through this planning process, there's some of this stuff that is going to be like, yeah, but we don't really like, we're all at the same table. We don't do that. Understand that some of this planning process is going to apply to your allies as well. When you're like initiating movement, and like some of those other things, you probably want to let your allies know that you're initiating movement as well. So that way they're able to go through and back you up as well.
Like the town guard or an allied cleric or.
Oh, yeah.
Every so often you have friends out there.
Oh, yeah. And the better you communicate with them, the more that they can generally help you on out with.
True.
From there, did I skip a slide? Oh, make it fun. All right, on to initiating movement. This is pretty basic. This is where you're really getting into the meat of what you're doing, whether or not it is, hey, we're heading over to the Temple of Doom, whether or not it is, okay, hey, we are now at we're heading on over to the fancy dinner where all the bad people are, and we have to, be able to get information or do all these kind of different things. This is definitely your initiating movement is where your kind of quest begins. Also, make sure to put in hashtag LLL and hashtag maps.
All right. Hashtag LLL. Enter.
As I kick it over to
Hashtag
Paul, and he just like, oh, let me make sure I get in for this.
Boom. Okay, now make sure none of you, nobody else needs to do this, really. As a matter of fact,
that's probably true.
It's a lot of effort. So if you don't do that, then those of us who do that will.
That's true. I think definitely during your initiating movement, this is where a lot of your like random encounters and stuff like that kind of pop up, and this is where your tentative plan, when you're looking at, you start to make some of your contingencies, that bottom point on there, that's where it's like, hey, one of the things in your tentative plan that can be really important is like, hey, are we going to get a long rest before we head into the big fight or something like that? If we aren't, then the wizard knows that, hey, I need to save these resources for whatever might encounter before that, which means that in our contingencies, hey, we might need to plan because I can't cast Fireball here because we need it later.
Yeah. And a lot of these things come down to what we call TTPs, or was it techniques, tactics, procedures?
Yep.
Whereby, like, let's say if we encounter an invisible force, well, that's when you have fairy fire. That's when you have glitter dust. That's when you have bags of flour that you toss in the air. If we encounter, Medusa, petrification attack. All right, close eyes, take 50% chance. Avert gaze, take whatever the things that your party normally does under situations. So that way, when you are in a reactive mode, you at least have sort of a muscle memory to fall back on that you don't necessarily need time to think. You just do because you've trained it, you've prepared for it.
And the other thing that it just helps out too is it as you develop your different TTPs for your group, as your DM knows like what you're going to do. When you arrive to different situations, it ends up cutting down on the communication time. It helps allowing to be able to be like, hey, we know what we're doing because this is what we talked about and agreed upon before.
Yeah.
So it ends up making things a lot faster as well.
But like DM, every morning I cast Mage Armor, I cast this, I do that. I constantly maintain concentration on a detect magic spell. I have I have a light rock in my back pocket that I always keep glowing. Those things that you can tell the DM ahead of time. So that way you don't need to be like, I pull out my light stone. Like, well, where did you get that from? It's like, I let you know that I always have this thing because there's literally no reason not to. Or guidance spell, like cantrips. If ever you can do something at will, there's really no excuse for not having it available to you unless you're like, say, unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, absolutely.
Articulate those TTPs to your DM so you can take advantage of your at-will abilities and your long duration abilities.
I'd also say a good tip to probably do is also write them down. Be like, hey, these are the TTPs for my character. And that'll also, because your DM isn't focusing on you half the time because they have 37 million things that they need to do. So I definitely think writing it down on a sticky, like, hey, this is my daily ritual that my cleric or that my spellcaster, that my fighter, whoever does. I'd probably give that copy to the DM, and then I'd also have a copy in my notebook. And then if there ever is a discussion of like, well, you didn't tell me you casted that, I'm like, hey, just heads up, like you said it was okay. And then I have it written down here of my specific things that I do every day. So really easy way to dungeon lawyer that.
So for initiate movement, I think this is one of the more contentious questions is, should the rogue be up front? How far in advance of the party should they be up? When they're sneaking around, being stealthy, conducting a reconnaissance, do you have a way of communicating with them? Because the one thing you don't want is for your rogue to get ambushed, to get spotted, to get into a scrap and not be able to support them in a timely fashion. Because the thing is, if you're close enough to help them, they can't sneak because you are giant, clunky, loud, noisy, attractive thing. But if they are stealthy by themselves and they happen to get found out, whether through like detect invisibility or something like that, then they are in for a world of pain. So, that is something when you are doing the initiation of movement to the objective, you're going to have to really come to an understanding of what risk are you willing to assume when your rogue runs out ahead of the party?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you keep them in the back, nice and safe and sound, but not particularly useful as far as finding traps or scouting ahead or assassinating sentries, what have you?
Well, that's something that we'll definitely get into in the next slide, which is when we get to conduct the reconnaissance.
It's fluid. It's fluid.
It's very fluid. So after once you've arrived to whatever your mission location is, generally you're going to be offset from that. So let's say in the situation where, hey, we're going to the governor's manor during this big dinner party, at which point we want to steal, the scroll of ultimate MacGuffin, so that way we can go through and slay the Dark Lord, whoever. Once you arrive at the party, this is where your gathering information needs to start. And that's where you're looking at entrances, exits. What are the guards doing? Are the guards have shifts? What's the security looking like? What's the attention on us? And those are all things that you guys want to start doing, and then start figuring out what's your communication plan for disseminating that amongst your group in a way that makes sense. This also works out for, hey, we're about to go into, the old ruined temple inside the mountain. As you go over and get to what's generally called an ORP, and I can't even remember what that acronym stands for, but it's essentially a little patrol base that you have away from the actual entrance. That's where you want to go through and be like, hey, we're going to go through and we're going to scout. We're going to see if people come in and out of this. And this is where definitely like some flash forward.
So it stands for objective rally point.
There we go. Got it.
Yay.
This is where having like some, fast forwarding your game can definitely help out. Cause like for me, if I'm doing this in real life, I might want to set a reconnaissance on the opening to a temple for 24 hours. And I might want to be like, hey, this is the plan. The rogue and the monk are going to go on over and they're going to get to this location where they could go through and they have sight on the temple. And they're going to sit there and they're going to watch, each one in 2-hour shifts, on and off for 24 hours. And they want to gather information. Generally, what you'd look at is what's called the SALT A report, which is size, activity, time, location. And then what's the other A for? SALT A. I think it's like a tribute. Oh, it's like I think it's like a tribute. It's like, what are they doing? Or what are they? Yeah, what are they doing? Like, what's their posture? I want them to gather that information and bring it on back. Again, playing that out in real time is going to take a really long time, and so that's definitely that's something where if I was going to bring that into a game, or if I was going to spring that on a dungeon master, I'd probably be like in our make a tentative plan. I'd probably tell the DM like, hey, once we get to this temple, we want to put a 24-hour recon on it. And what I could do as a DM is then be like, oh, okay, what information are you going to look for when you get there? Give them the information that I'm looking for, be pretty specific about it. Then when they arrive and when they successfully put that reconnaissance in place, I can probably just hand them a sheet of paper and say, hey, because it's something that I was able to plan, the session before. So hand them a sheet of paper saying, hey, this is everything that you observed in your 24-hour period.
So one of the most powerful divination spells, in my opinion, is Detect Magic. Mm-hmm. It's a first level spell. As a ritual, with like 15-minute cast time, you can have it, all day long with expending no spell slots. And short range, it allows you to observe magical auras, identify schools of magic, and unless specifically warded against detection, which is an option for really super important plot things. But for the most part, that will enable you to identify the supernatural and the interesting in your area. So both before, during, and after any combat encounter, that spell has utility. Mages have familiars. You can see through your familiar's eyes. So you have a potentially a flying, stealthy, mobile eye in the sky. There's divination, augury. There's speak with animals, speak with dead, speak with plants. Like there are so many magical options to enhance your reconnaissance. And again, that's how we kind of parallel modern day capabilities as far as our ability to electronically intercept enemy communications and whatnot. Except here you have a literal pipeline to God to ask, hey, what's going on? So there are so many options out there in the game.
And that's something that I think this is an interesting dynamic that the DM can kind of work with, depending on like, hey, if the characters are having fun during the recon bit, during the planning bit and stuff like that, I'll probably go through and make sure that they have the opportunity to get, for instance, like a long rest. So that way they don't have to choose between having like a battle spell and kind of like an information gathering spell. Allowing them to be able to get that long rest gives them that opportunity to be able to like get that and be able to kind of have their cake and eat it too and stuff like that. One of the things that I definitely wouldn't want to do as a DM is, let's say that your party is going through and planning, hey, we're going to conduct this reconnaissance. We want to do it this way. This is what we're going to do. And then all of a sudden throw like a time crunch on them. Be like, oh no, all of a sudden you saw the princess get dragged into the cave right then. Well, then your casters get screwed because they've planned for doing this reconnaissance and having this stuff. And now they're going to end up walking into battle without being able to have those battle spells and being able to participate in that. So it's something definitely to keep in mind. And that's where the planning, I do think involving your DM in the planning allows them to be able to shape the game more for your benefit. When you go through and try and have your secret plan and try and keep that from the DM, I definitely think a lot of times that can backfire. Again, it's going to be table specific. There are definitely some tables where DMs are playing against the players, but definitely that's one of the things that you can look for, is having a good synergistic relationship where the DM is playing with the players.
So Kaminora asked, when Speak with Plants is cast, does the spell give that plant human intelligence? No, it gives them limited sentience, and they're intentionally vague as to what intelligence score that implies. But the spell does say that it gives them the ability to relay information to you about the past 24 hours. Gain information about creatures that have passed, weather, or other circumstances. So enough sentience to communicate weather, creature, and activities.
And I think there's definitely like an aspect of where for some of these spells and stuff like that, you gotta understand what the spirit of the spell is. And the fact that it's a make-believe world. Maybe the plants do have some intelligence that they're just not able to communicate, but that's just something where I think it's definitely just going to depend on kind of the DM's approach to the players. I've definitely been a letter of the law guy every once in a while when the players piss me off, and it's just like, no, that's not what that spell says. But during your conduct reconnaissance, A, make sure you do it. B, make sure that information is sent out between everybody, so that way everybody's aware of the different hazards or the different benefits that are going on. And that's where that report back to the group aspect comes to. So at some point, again, if your rogue and monk have been out there for 24 hours, at some point they're going to come back and be able to give all that information, because after that, it's when you're going to complete the plan. So this step is pretty basic. It's you pull in all the information that you got from the reconnaissance, and you take whatever plan you had, you make whatever changes you have to have, and then you make sure that that goes over and gets out to the entire group. Now, don't forget, this could also be get out to your entire ally base. In our example of the orcs attacking the village, this is like, hey, we got this information on the orc encampment. This is when we think they're going to attack. Here's all the information to all the villagers, so that way they can be prepared for it. Excuse me.
Yeah. So Shrax Liz says it should be a player DM collaboration rather than versus each other. And I would say there's a time and a place for that. But I mean, before, there have been times where I've sort of hammed up my frustration at the player's success. Like, oh, you defeated me. Oh, this is, you were so lucky. And then inside, I'm just like, oh, that went perfectly. They did exactly what I thought they would do. They won. They got the treasure. This is great. They look happy. Oh, now I need to pretend to be frustrated with them so they feel like they've thwarted me. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a little bit of satisfaction, especially when you're like, I don't know how they're going to get through this encounter. And then they do. And you're like, huh, interesting.
Because I don't know, it feels like if things get out of control like that, and you're on the verge of a TPK as a DM, you've kind of borked up a bit. Like if things are out of control, that means you misjudge something. Now, occasionally, if that happens because of just ungodly, unlucky dice rolls, or you've had extremely lucky dice rolls, that's one thing. But for me, it's always a balancing act. Like, I don't want them to one round and curb stomp everything I throw their way and yawn at what I've done. But on the same token, like, if I'm dropping, like, I like dropping bodies, but I don't like killing players. I feel like I want to give them a nice medium experience where it feels like there's stakes, but probabilistically they shouldn't fail.
And that's the interesting balance. It's definitely on the DM's point. I don't think as a player, it's your job to go through and do the best you can for planning. when it comes to or the party enacted a terrible plan, this is definitely something that is. There's suggestions on this, but there's definitely no one size fits all solution for this. We had a game recently that I was playing in where there was a village child that basically was starting to get hints that she was a Cirrus for the Hanatas being blood touched. And one of our players desperately was like, hey, you need to come with us so you get protected because these guys are coming after you. And kind of argued with this child and her father for about 15 minutes. And there definitely was a point where it was just like, even us as players was like, hey, just so you know, it really seems like the DM is hard and set that this isn't going to happen. So like there is, there's definitely kind of like, sometimes I think there's an appropriate little pull behind the curtain there where it's just like, hey, heads up, like you're doing all the right things, but this isn't happening. No matter what you try and do, short of you trying to take away this character's free will. It's a thing. There might be an alignment change that happens with your character as well. Like there definitely might be it's definitely something that is difficult, I think, for a DM where it's like, hey, like they're really trying to go right here, but I can't let them do it.
So, and as a quick side note, if you don't know what a blood touch hand-ties is, on the Gooey Cube Discord, we have a weekly book club where we've been going through all of the source manuals, the Encyclopedia Zyathé Volume 1. We have a channel in there specifically where we're going through the chapters of these source manuals and really familiarizing ourselves with the world of Zyathé and the rules of the campaign setting itself. So all y'all are more than welcome to join us there.
That's an awesome plug.
Thank you. I thought so.
So that's when you're going to come to when it comes to complete the plan. These are some of the aspects. Again, you're going to finalize your details, you're assigned your responsibilities, develop your contingency plans, communicate the plan to the group, and then confirm your timelines and objectives. Great tool for this is after, as a group, you've agreed on the plan, ask one person to brief the entire plan. And that just helps confirm like, oh, yep, they know exactly what their part is and they know what everybody else's part is.
And like contingency planning is huge. Because I mean, I'm sure you've all heard the comment that, the plan doesn't live past
initial contact.
Yeah. So like, and you don't necessarily want to be helpless and at the mercy of reactive, flailing in order to try and compensate for the unseen. So the time and effort that you put into developing contingency plans, that comes from your spells that you prepare. That comes from the consumables that you procure beforehand.
Allies you can bring in.
And a lot of that comes to, again, I can't harp on this enough, an analysis of your capabilities versus requirements. Like, can you handle flyers? Can you handle mind control magic with a protection from evil spell prepared? Can you handle damage reduction? Can you handle tremor sense? Can you, like, what different things could potentially prevent you from being successful, and how can you overcome them? And that's where you have to have your golf bag full of weapons. You got your silver, your cold iron, your adamantium, your axiomatic, your holy, your unholy, your, what do you have, in your toolbox?
And this is where DMs, I do think you need to be a little bit more liberal in how you give out information. My example for this was I was playing with Alphinius, and he introduced some crazy monster type thing. And I'm like, okay, cool. Crazy monster. I'm like, hey, and I started asking, in roleplay sense, I was like, hey, like, what's this thing abilities? What's its powers? What are we looking at here? And he's like, you don't understand. It is a terrible, most powerful thing. And I'm like, right. Okay. So what can it do? It is of the most dreadful evil. And I'm like, okay, right. But like, and I understand you're trying to build the suspense, but essentially the information that you're giving me is, hey, don't engage in this thing whatsoever. And I'm willing to bet your quest probably involves me dealing with this thing.
But then again, as a DM, sometimes you want that fool me once, shame on you kind of moment where you want to catch players by surprise. You want them to be ill prepared to handle something. And then after that point, they'll never let it stop them ever again. Because like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, that's not going to fly. and which point they are then prepared. So sometimes you do want to deliberately obfuscate the abilities and unique qualities of a creature in order to give them that surprise, pucker moment of it does what?
I feel like at least for me, like some of the things that I think you should give me as a DM and as a player, and as I'm trying to say, just is, let's say you have whatever crazy monster, and I think the types of kind of like attacks and stuff like that. So let's say it's like, oh, what does this monster do? Let's say in reality it goes on through, it has this crazy tongue and it, sticks it up your nose and sucks out your brain and it has all your memories or something like that, and it can turn into you.
I like it.
But it definitely has like long claws and it's really, really fast. I think like definitely telling me like, oh, like this thing is extremely maneuverable. It's very, very fast on its feet. It likes to get up close. It doesn't maintain, kind of distance. I think giving me some of you don't have to give me the super special things about the monster, but I definitely think kind of some of the ways that it maybe kind of, again, it likes to set traps for its, prey or something like that. I think giving me some of that is definitely like, give me that stuff. So that way I can walk in with at least like a third of a plan.
And then sometimes, and I think we're going to be opposite on this one, because as a DM, I love surprises. Like, so for example, adding templates onto other monsters. So for example, Beholder Tyrants, or like the undead variant of a Beholder. So players, when they approach it, they're like, okay, Beholder, got anti-magic ray, we got eye stalk, disintegrate, harm, fear. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to prepare for it. And then come to find out, oh no, it's an undead variation of it that has a completely different ability set. So what the players originally planned for and thought they knew about the monster is now upended, and they're put into the more reactive mode. So, as DM, I love doing that. It's classic Sun Tzu. When you are near, make the enemy think you're far. When you're far, make the enemy think you're near. Like misdirection.
No, absolutely. In the interest of time, we're going to try and hurry up through the last two steps. Issuing your operations order. So there's a very military official way for doing this. You can actually look up op order template online if you want to get that into the weeds with it. Again, essentially what this is just doing is it's just developing it clear and concise. It's generally you have a smaller planning group that comes up with this, and then you have to disseminate it out between 30 or so Joes. For me, where I think some of this definitely comes into play is when you're talking about your different allies that you want to make sure like, hey, this is what we're going to go do. This is, how long we're going to be gone. This is some of the things that we think that we're going to be encountering against. So that way, you give the DM ammo to be able to help you out because you've set the precedent for that help. I tell every DM this. I'm like, hey, listen, if you want to completely ruin my game, have an NPC come to rescue our group. I would rather us die. I would rather a TPK than, oh, hey, this random druid that you guys have never met before just happened to be walking around in the bog the same time that you guys were. It happens to be a level whatever to be able to rescue that. I'm like, nope, just let me die. Like
Deus Ex Machina.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you're gonna Ex Machina, nope, hard pass. But what I don't have an issue with is, hey, I did a good job working on our support network. Again, Green Beret, Unconventional Warfare. We've done a good job of briefing up our allies, letting them know things that we need and stuff like that. And then the DM being able to bring those into our quest or our situation because we've done the work to get those on the back end. Is your turn, Paul?
Oh, great. So yeah, this one with the military, like you said, there's a dissemination that has to take place. There are hierarchies, there are echelons, and communicating that information consistently to get everybody on a common operating picture is huge. There really isn't that much of an analog in D&D because it's like it's your party. It's the 6 of you or the 5 of you or however many they are. So here the analogy kind of breaks down a bit. There's a direct 1-for-1 on this one. So yeah, it is what it is. It's step 7.
It is. It's step 7. And this is definitely where it gets interesting when you've come up with a plan all together at the same table and you don't have like outside people you have to talk to. It kind of feels like this is a little bit redundant.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah.
What I will
it's
definitely,
fluid. It's fluid.
It is very fluid. I definitely think though, just making sure that everybody understands what the objectives are very clearly when you go to do stuff is like one of just the most important thing. So that way, if you do have a split group situation or if you do have a whatever, you still say, hey, what's our main objective? Let's go do that. last part, and this is really like some of the most important aspects of this entire discussion,
Sure.
is definitely continuously refine the plan. Do not get so held up on the plan that you cannot change it, and maintain your flexibility and adaptability.
They say improvise, adapt, overcome.
Absolutely. And that's where I definitely think if you have clearly understood the intent behind the quest or the mission or whatever you're trying to accomplish and the key tasks, those last two bits are super easy. But when those aren't clearly defined, that's when those last, because in your mind, the entire thing is we have to go kill this guy. You don't understand. The intent is we need to create this, whatever it is, with a situation, so that way our hero or whatever can take place.
And I hate to say it, but this is where you have the advantage of table talk. So, for example, you're in the middle of initiative, you're fighting the big bad evil guy. One of your party members spots a glowing, reliquary on a shelf, and then that player says, "Hey, Bob, you see the relic? The DM said there's a reliquary glowing over there. Maybe if we go and destroy that, that'll give us some advantage." And now that wouldn't be able to happen in real time because you're busy, you're engaged, you're fighting. There's chaos and noise and blood and but you're a bunch of folks sitting around a table playing a role-playing tabletop game, rolling dice. So you have that advantage where you can, unless the DM like overtly says no talking, you only have 6 seconds in an initiative round. You don't know that. But you do have that table talk, and you can make observations like that allow you to refine the plan in stride potentially.
And that's where definitely like taking the advantage of a short rest or taking what we call a tactical pause of being like, hey guys, we just got new information. Does this change what our objectives are? Does this change what our key tasks are? Does this change the way that we should approach this different situation so that way we can be successful? And that's definitely something that for like me as a player, like I'll stop my group and be like, hey guys, like let's have a quick discussion on this. And for me, sometimes I'm very cool with like, oh, cool, nothing's changed. All right. But we're all on the same page that nothing has changed and we're able to move forward with what we're doing versus feeling like there's maybe lingering or loose strands out there amongst the group, amongst the plan.
I mean, honestly, we probably have a whole nother Zyathé segment just on this step alone, just for the sheer amount of options that you have open and available to you in order to respond fluid, in stride to obstacles, to unexpected turns of events. If your assumptions were incorrect and a curveball comes your way, this is where the situations change as you gain more information.
Absolutely. One last point that I have, and I'm going to kick it over to Paul for any loose strands or anything. One of the things that I definitely wanted to bring up, especially when you get into your finalizing your plan, is this is where I think a little bit of metagame knowledge. If your entire plan revolves around one dice roll, you need to revisit the plan. If your entire plan, if your entire plan is, hey, we're going to sneak into this keep and there's some guards out front, and your entire plan for getting in is a deception roll away from failing to be able to get, that's where you need to revisit the plan, and that's where you need to come up with your contingencies. And that's where the first plan that I'm going to come up with isn't going to require any dice rolls at all. My second contingency for getting in is hopefully going to require, 2 or 3 dice rolls, for the same thing. Like, hey, maybe first thing we're going to do is we're going to try some diplomacy. I'm going to try and bribe this guy. I'm going to try and, go over and do that. If that doesn't work, then maybe I'm going to go through and I'm going to try and lie. I'm going to use some deception. And then if that doesn't work, then we're going to use this spell, modify memory or whatever, as our last contingency and that's one of the things that you kind of need to approach some of the stuff is identify where you might have dice rolls in your plan and make sure that you have, what we call a PACE plan, a primary, alternative, contingency, emergency plan for when you get into those dice rolls. What happens if you fail them? You have to keep moving forward.
And it helps to know the capabilities of your teammates. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't want to make enemies by telling other people how they should play their characters, but there's literally nothing stopping you from going up to your cleric and be like, I noticed that you have a blessing spell that you are able to call down. I implore you to gift me with your divine protection. Like know their capabilities, and if it's not coming to their forethought, maybe remind them, maybe specifically request it. Maybe ask them a question about it. Hey, I noticed that you have a special bond with your magical familiar. Might they be able to fit down the sewer? You know, like, and maybe they've already thought about it. But again, you have to be careful not to appear as if you're a know-it-all who's trying to play other people's characters for them.
I definitely think the best way to do it is in role play.
Sure.
If I'm a player and I'm like, hey, Paul, use your familiar to go over and scout that out, you know, as out of character, I think that grates on people much more than me being in character and, you know, going through and being like, hey, is there any chance, can you go through and have this guy, you know, scout out or something like that? But doing it in character, A, it just brings a little bit of depth to it. But B, I think it ends up grating on people a lot less.
And role playing, it enriches your gaming experience, period.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
win-win.
Any last points that you have for the group on any of the steps or anything?
How long do I have? I have 2 quick stories I want to tell.
Yeah, as long as you're on your schedule, man.
Let's say no.
Alphinius and Cameron aren't here to be like, oh, let's wrap it up. Like, we're gonna have a 3-hour Goo Morning Zyathé today.
They can't stop us.
As I've said before, normally this whole like class process in the military is like a week.
Yeah.
Oh, you know,
or you could potentially do it like months in advance, because every echelon, it's called the 1/3, 2/3 rule, where you take 1/3 of the time available that you have for planning, and then you afford 2/3 of the available time for your subordinates to take that information, to hit you back with their RFIs or requests for information, and to develop their own plans, because they have the same issue one echelon down as well, 1/3, 2/3, where they want to take 1/3 of the time to develop their plan and pass it down. So the higher you are up in the planning process, the more time you need to allocate for your subordinates to make the plan their own, to tailor it for their own specific formation. Yep. So
what do you got for your 2 stories, bros?
Okay, 2 stories. Let's see. I have a story of foolishness and a story of triumph. Which do you want to hear first? Actually, I'll ask chat. First answer in chat gets it. Triumph or foolishness?
And we're going to awkwardly wait during the delay of the internet, trying to go through and route through.
Plus,
wait. Most people aren't actually watching. They're like doing chores and stuff like that. So they're like, wait, did they like cue us in for something?
The left one. So unhelpful.
All right. I think that means triumph.
Well, I read. Okay, sure. So I was doing a field training exercise where I was in the blue cell, or what was it? The green cell? The cell that was like adjacent forces. And I was given control of the whole sustainment brigade, in a scenario. So I had other sustainment brigades calling me, asking me for support. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm a like, I think it was the first lieutenant at the time. I'm replicating like an entire battalion staff. So I would I had a little notebook, and every time they asked for somebody, like, well, we want to talk to your S2, like S2, is going to be Captain Fields, and he's from Alabama, and he has all the information. And so I would like develop mannerisms and accents in order to try and flesh these people out and give them identities.
It is so funny in a military exercise when you find somebody who very clearly plays D&D.
Oh, yeah.
And they're on White Cell, providing
White Cell,
fake,
that's the one.
Yeah, the fake whatever it is, and you're sitting there, and they're like, "Hey, are you gonna be able to manage all this?" And you're like, "Yeah, I can manage 5 different people's mannerisms. I normally have to do 37 for my D&D group." Anyways, continue.
Hello, I am Lieutenant Pennyfield. Pleasure to meet you. And then actually at the end of an exercise, I had a colonel call me up. He was like, "Hey, I'm looking for Lieutenant Colonel Johnny. He helped my chaplain out pretty well, and I just wanted to, thank him for." I'm like, "Well, sir, I'm Lieutenant Hostler, and I was that lieutenant colonel, and I appreciate it." And and like, so I actually had these people fooled that I was like a whole battalion's worth of people of different like personalities and ethnic backgrounds, and loved it. It was amazing. And as a dungeon master, you know how to do that. You like, whenever the player is like, okay, I go and I talk to the barkeep's assistant. He has a bit of a limp, brown hair, cleft palate. His name is Philip. He's in love with the gardener's daughter, and terribly shy and stutters. okay, great. Now I've made this person. The biggest issue is you have to make a record of that, because who knows, maybe 3 months later, they're going to be coming back to that town. Like, hey, how's Philip doing? And I'll be like, Philip, who is it? Oh, you have a kid with the, okay, let me look at the notes. Yeah. So good note taking and improvisational aptitude, rewarding.
Absolutely.
Last story. That was Triumph. Story of foolishness. I was, I think it was my junior year in ROTC. I went home. It was after LDAC or was it Fort Lewis? We had a training. Anyway, so I came home. I'm a cadet hosteler. I'm ready to commission. I know what I'm talking about. And I go to a big battle interactive up in Pennsylvania. It was Keelan for the Living Greyhawk RPGA. And I had a high enough level of character that I was able to be on the command table where like all the high level players gathered together and we're plotting out this big battle interactive. So the people who were running the games were like pointing out, here are all the objectives. Here's what needs to happen. I said, no. We need to focus all of our efforts on this key terrain right here. This river crossing is essential to our mission. We at all costs we have to grab and hold and develop this river crossing, and nothing else matters. Everything all in on this. And they're like, okay, well, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Let's do that. So we did, and all the interactive people, like, we barreled onto it, we swept it, we owned it. It was great. And then when we woke up in the morning, the entire crossing was over flooded because Ghost Kraken apparently have control weather. So the enemy basically completely flooded the battle, turning our key terrain into impassable, useless terrain. And all those other things we neglected steamrolled into us, and we were swept from the field. And 100 different D&D players lost the battle interactive. We were defeated because of my hubris in thinking that, by hyperfixating on what I thought the most important thing was, that it ended up catastrophic. And I was able to take that defeat and apply it to my real world military career where actual human lives were at stake. And I was able to be like, well, remember what happened the last time you hyperfixated on what you thought was most important, and you neglected not only to not have tunnel vision, but to disregard the inputs of your peers and your subordinates and your superiors. Yeah, remember what happened then? You don't want that to happen again now, do you? Well, maybe open your eyes and look around. So that was one example of how foolishness in Dungeons and Dragons made me a better person and better able to execute the real world mission. So
just remember, folks, the biggest takeaway from today is that if anybody's hounding you about playing too much Dungeons and Dragons, just say, no, I'm learning life lessons right now.
Seriously. True. Straight up.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with us. Again, these are called the troop leading procedures. If this is something that you thought was like really interesting and you want to kind of like an outline for it and anything like that, you're welcome to go through. Just Google up Army troop leading procedures or Army TLPs. I'm pretty sure you can find about 37 like PowerPoints from different units that have held classes on them that just like list them up on the internet and whatnot. So you can definitely find a ton of resources out there. You can also reach out to either Paul or I in the Gooey Den of Enlightenment. I'll probably post up this little PowerPoint that I went ahead and created up too. So that way, again, if you're a dungeon master trying to come up with better planning for your campaigns, a little bit better structure, or if you're just a player who just wants to try and have a little bit more structured approach to your planning, you can go ahead and reference that. But with that, appreciate you guys all for coming on out. Any last remarks, Paul?
Oh, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, keep all your adventures sticky. Y'all take care now.